Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome DJ King of Clayton Associates.
Thank you. Very excited to be here with you at the 2015 Global South Summit. Again, my name is DJ King, and I'm representing Clayton Associates and our early stage investment fund, which is committed to cultivating innovation in healthcare and technology by providing financial capital, mentorship, and other support services to talented entrepreneurs. This year, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to announce the Early Stage Innovation Investment Award recipient. Many great companies this year submitted applications with ideas aimed at solving some of the most challenging issues, both domestically and abroad. After thoughtful consideration by our team, this year's Early Stage Innovation Investment Award, I'm proud to say, goes to Spirus Health. Spirus is a new concept designed to bring together the very best in clinical practices, case management programs, and technology solutions for more proactive, efficient, and effective treatment of one of the world's most widespread health issues, chronic respiratory disease. Please join me in congratulating and welcoming Spirus Health CEO, Brooke Bishop.
Thank you, DJ, and a special thanks to the Global Action Platform. The award is a true honor, as is being among so many wonderful people doing tremendous work to bring health and prosperity to people, which is not only important to me as a person, but foundational to the creation of our company, Spirus Health. Thank you very much.
Thank you, DJ. Congratulations. The first of many exciting announcements that you're going to hear during this Global Action Summit. Hello, I'm Kitty Moon Emergy. I am the Chief Operations Officer of the Global Action Platform. And on behalf of our entire team, a warm welcome to each and every one of you for our 2015 Global Action Summit. This year's summit is indeed going to be extra special on multiple levels. We're tying into the United Nations Global Sustainable Development Goals. The incomparable Fareed Zakaria is going to be hosting and providing invaluable insight. And be prepared for absolutely amazing speakers, exciting ideas, and important announcements. Of course, you know you are here in Music City. Well, Grammy Award-winning singer-songwriter Amy Grant has interrupted her touring schedule to kick off officially our summit this year. I would venture to say that Amy Grant, in addition to being an internationally acclaimed superstar, just may possess more heart than any living singer-songwriter in the business today. She cares passionately about the very issues that we're going to be talking about today and tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to introduce the wonderful one and only Amy Grant.
Thank you, Kitty. Well, I do love Nashville, and I knew nothing about Gap until this invitation. So that's the great thing about being invited to sing, is this has opened up a whole new experience for me. So I started writing songs when I was 15. It's good to know what you love doing, and because I've been doing it for 40 years. Yeah, I'm just going to sing a couple of songs, but I would love, in light of all of the tragedy around the world, but especially in France, I just want to remind myself and all of us that the power in a little good is exponentially greater than the power in bad. This is one of those moments when all that really matters is crystal clear. We are woven together by whatever threads of life that have brought us here. We are stripped of all our layers. We are getting to the core. Tell me something real and nothing more, 'cause I don't know why, and I don't know how, I don't know where. Maybe all I know is now. So we're here between the bookends of everything that was and what will be. There's a wealth of information, but not so many answers, it seems to me. So I face the unfamiliar and nothing is clear. Only blind belief can carry me from here. And I don't know why, I don't know how, I don't know where. Maybe all I know is now. Hold my hand and hold this moment. Time sure feels precious, don't it? Life is always changing, this I know. I don't know why, no, I don't know how, I don't know where. Maybe all I know is now. Maybe all I know is now. One of the beautiful things about this time in life, which I consider the back half, last third, depending on how well the gene pool works in my favor. But to have worked very hard and enjoyed success until now, I feel like the adventure, that the best part is ahead. The best part of connecting all of the dots of people I've met, the adventure of just all of those disparate threads of creativity and connection coming together and doing, I believe, the greatest work. I'm so grateful for the platform of music, but I believe that my mission in life is so much bigger than music, and it is about using music to bring people together. There's enough room on this planet for everyone to stand in the sunshine. There's enough room for everyone to have opportunity. There's enough wealth and possibility for everyone to thrive. And I'm so grateful to have been a part of this gathering. And I'll share with you the adventure that I am on begins every day with this simple prayer. God, lead me today to those I need and to those that need me, and let something I do have eternal significance. I started praying that prayer 25 years ago, and I tell you, I pump gas differently at the pump. Because somebody will be on the other side, and I'll think, wonder if they need me. Even crazier, what if I need them? And it just makes everything feel like a potential adventure. 'Cause everybody needs a helping hand. Take a look at your fellow man. Tell me, what can I do today? 'Cause everybody needs a helping out. If that ain't what it's all about, tell me, what can I do? What can I do today? We've all seen trouble from time to time. There's a mountain ahead I've got no strength to climb. Hey, if you're feeling that you're strong, reach out to me. I hope this journey won't take long, but won't you please have mercy, yeah. 'Cause everybody needs a helping hand. Take a look at your fellow man. Tell me, what can I do today? What can I do? Everybody needs a helping out. If that ain't what it's all about, tell me, what can I do? What can I do today? Well, I'm talking about the soul all alone, needing the daily bread, someplace to lay his head. Oh, and I'm talking about the neighbor on your street. Won't you look him in the eye? Take time to speak. That's mercy, yeah. 'Cause everybody needs a helping hand. Take a look at your fellow man. Tell me, what can I do today? What can I do? Everybody needs a helping out. If that ain't what it's all about, tell me, what can I do? What can I do today? Everybody needs a helping hand. Take a look at your fellow man. What can I do? Oh, everybody needs a helping out. If that ain't what it's all about, tell me, what can I do? What can I do today? What can I do today?
Thank you, Amy. I literally can't think of a better way to kick off our summit than with Amy Grant. Absolutely a treasure through and through. I've had the good fortune to work with Scott Massey for the last 4 or 5 years, literally since the beginning of the Global Action Platform. And speaking from experience, I can honestly say that the Global Action Platform's chair and CEO is a visionary of the first order. And I think during the course of this summit, you're going to find out that the United Nations agrees. Ladies and gentlemen, Scott Massey.
Thank you very much, and thank you for those kind words, Kitty. Thank you, Amy, for that wonderful, inspirational way to begin. Before I begin my remarks today, though, I'd like to invite you to join me for a moment of silence in memory of those who are the victims of the violence in Paris and Beirut and other places around the world recently. Let's take a moment and pause in silence. and let us pray that strife and war may end and peace may abound. It was a memorable evening. The blood moon was shining over the East River on a near-perfect September night in New York just 2 short months ago. Leaders from around the world had gathered on nations to celebrate the formal day. Historic conflicts and global disagreements had been set aside, had come together for a common vision for the future. Just imagine if the spirit of cooperation felt that night could continue. What might we achieve? What might we achieve if the leaders of the world worked together on this new agenda? The 17 Sustainable Development Goals adopted at the UN are crisp, simple, and aspirational. The goals challenge us to imagine a world with no poverty, no hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable clean energy, decent work and economic growth, sustainable industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, sustainable life below the water, sustainable life on land, peace, justice, strong institutions, and partnerships were the goals. These are the goals. Now imagine how their implementation would transform our world. At this summit, we will begin to outline strategies, not just to imagine, but also to achieve the top 3 goals, which have been at the core of our mission for the last 3 years. But before previewing aspects of our program, let me tell you a little bit about how we got to this year's program. This January, I had the pleasure to meet with the Secretary General's leadership team on the post-millennial goals at the United Nations in New York to begin to explore possible collaborations. At this initial exploratory meeting, I explained 3 points about our work. First, I noted that we are a university business alliance serving as the think tank and convener for a 20-acre innovation campus in Nashville called One City. Second, I explained that we organize our work through a global action platform that convenes cross-sector leaders and makes impact investments in scalable, sustainable solutions for abundant food, health, to connect applications to demonstrate results. The response from the leadership of the UN was really remarkable and tremendous. Not only had we identified and built action plans around their top 3 goals, but just the week before, they told me the UN had decided to launch the new post-2015 goals under the banner of global action. As Nelson Muffa of the post-2015 team said, "You've identified our top goals and already built a global action platform, a global action summit, and a global action report. I think we should work together." And we decided not to pursue trademark infringement against the UN. As a result, we took immediate action to collaborate in 3 primary ways. First, we agreed to move the launch of our 2015 Global Action Report to coincide with the launch of the Sustainable Development Goals in September, and to add a whole special section on the SDGs. If you haven't already received a copy of this report, extra copies are available at the registration table. I'd invite you to take one. Second, we agreed to design our November summit around the goals in order to continue and expand the global dialogue and provide a bridge between the launch of the SDGs in September and the climate summit, which is coming up next month in Paris in December. Third, we mutually decided to include the Secretary General in the 2015 summit program. Each of these steps has now been accomplished. In further discussion with the UN leadership, we also learned that the new SDGs were being designed to engage entrepreneurs and innovators and the private sector to advance business solutions for the goals. These new plans also place a special focus on engaging cities and urban areas as model test sites for the goals, to apply the goals with a Goldilocks effect, to apply them in places where it was neither too big nor too small to show real demonstrated results. This SDG focus on sustainable model solutions combined with business innovations directly corresponded with our approach at Global Action Platform. Our relationship with One City as a model urban community and our history, as you heard from DJ, with Challenge Impact Fund investments meant that we had already begun to develop programs and activities like those that were being envisioned by the architects of the Sustainable Development Goals. With that focus on business innovation in mind, we will showcase some exciting transformative solutions aligned with our work and the SDGs at this year's summit. For example, here at the summit, Global Action Platform will provide the global launch for a new technology called Ecotech. Ecotech provides abundant electricity for a city of 3 million people or more with 0 carbon emissions. Just think about that. Abundant energy, no carbon emissions. Here at the summit, you'll be the first to learn about this new clean energy solution that can scale to solve global energy and environmental issues. The system also provides solutions for abundant clean water and waste management. Using proven technologies and natural processes, the developers of Ecotech have created a breakthrough solution ready for implementation that could very well move the world toward the energy and environmental goals of the SDGs and the upcoming discussions at the Paris Climate Summit. To address both food and health challenges, we'll also be showcasing an amazing solution for indoor environmental health. At this summit, you will see how this innovation significantly improves safety in the food supply chain and eradicates toxins and pathogens inside buildings. Based on nearly a decade of research, this technology is a patented industrial-scale solution based on prior technology originally created by MIT and NASA for the Space Lab. Through the company Puridyme and Lenovo, this technology is already saving crops in the industrial greenhouses of organic food companies like Archie Acres, completely eradicating salmonella in meat packing facilities, and saving lives in hospitals around the world. And you will personally have the opportunity to experience this technology in the health track and in other places around the summit as the days go on. We will also announce tomorrow the launch of an exciting international agri-food platform, a collaboration involving Wageningen University, UC Davis, the European Union, and the Global Action Platform. We will hear updates from 2 of the companies which have already received Challenge Fund investments in the past. Finally, I'll briefly note here, not to steal the thunder for Tuesday night, that we'll announce the launch of a comprehensive development model in the Philippines. As a teaser, I'll say that this project promises to set a new global standard for the social, economic, and environmental development in underdeveloped regions. And I hope you'll join us for tomorrow night at our dinner. These are just a few of the highlights of the transformative new businesses and investments we will showcase at this year's summit. Throughout the year and in future summits and forums, we plan to highlight other transformative business solutions aligned with food, health, and prosperity, the One City urban model, and the Sustainable Development Goals. Today and tomorrow, we will also announce financial investments and expansions of impact fund developments as well, so stay tuned for those special announcements. As these few examples show, we live in truly exciting times and foresee amazing innovations on the horizon. I had the opportunity this morning to listen to the Summit Fellows make brief presentations of their ideas, of the challenges that they're going to be trying to resolve through their research and through new businesses and through new organizations that they're launching. And frankly, I think we should all just leave them in the room and go home and come back and ask them what we should do next. They were very inspiring. So there's some exciting things on the horizon, but at the same time, we can't minimize the challenges we face. We're also looking forward to Fareed's comments in a few moments on what's going on in the world. These things truly touch all of us. And I know it was a real challenge for you, Fareed, to be with us instead of at CNN at the height of all of these issues and discussions. And we're so grateful to you for coming to be with us and to share your thoughts at this time. At the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, the 70th President of the UN General Assembly noted the following additional challenges and statistics in his sermon on September 21st. 183,000 children died from violence in 43 war zones last year. 60 million people fled their homes due to conflict. 800 million people still live in extreme poverty. And 92 individuals possess and control more financial wealth than 60% of the remainder of the world's population. These data provide a snapshot insight into some of the challenges and obstacles we face in moving toward a better world. In addition, we also know that the world's population is moving toward a peak of somewhere between 9 and 10 billion people over the next 35 years. Urbanization is likewise increasing at the same time. So as a result, when we hit peak population, some 60 to 70% of the world's people will live in cities, the largest percentage in human history. To give you a sense of the scale of this change, to meet the needs of the projected urban growth is the equivalent to building a city for 1 million people from the ground up every week for the next 30 years. This urban population growth will place enormous strains on the world's cities and rural areas alike. To meet the challenge will require new models for sustainable, resilient megacities and new models for rural economies, both issues that we'll address at this year's summit. To create a better world for all people will require the contributions of businesses, religious leaders and communities, governments, academic institutions, NGOs, individual citizens, thought leaders, small villages and tribes, large cities and rural areas. From all corners and from all sectors, leaders will be needed to step forward. As Anatole France, the great French poet, once wrote, "To accomplish great things, you must not only act, but also dream, not only plan, but also believe." So today, can we plan and act? Can we both dream and believe? Together with you, I think we can. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Summit host and moderator, Fareed Zakaria.
Thank you so much. It is always a pleasure and an honor to be here. And I think one of the things that I was struck by in Scott Massey's remarks and his wonderful closing was that, of course, this summit is, in a sense, a fulfillment of that vision of Anatole France, that it is a dream, it is a plan, but it is also an executed and actionable set of agenda items. And for that, I think we have to thank Scott for his vision, for his leadership, but also for making these things happen. It's very unusual to have something this ambitious that involves so many stakeholders come together in the way that he's been able to do it. I think that all of us can see in this summit itself a small glimpse of what is possible if you have good leadership, if you have a vision, but also then if you somehow sustain and implement it. So Scott, thank you. Look, I thought I'd start by just talking a little bit about not the events in Paris, because you know about them, but why they happened and how it relates to what we're doing here. People are always puzzled and horrified and bewildered by the kind of violence they're seeing now. And I think it is entirely appropriate to be puzzled and horrified and bewildered by it. Because in a way, what we're trying to figure out is something very, very unusual, which is the ability to believe in a kind of ideology, to believe in a worldview that is so motivating to you that you are able to do great harm to other people. That you are able to inflict enormous pain on other people because you have convinced yourself that this is actually the right thing to do. In a sense, the most dramatic version of this, the most dramatic manifestation of this, is that what you see in these terrorists in Paris and elsewhere is not just the willingness to kill. That, unfortunately, is fairly common in human societies, and you see it in every country. Certainly we see it a great deal in the United States. It is not simply the willingness to kill, but the willingness to die that is, that cries out for some larger explanation, and that cries out for an explanation about what is going on in these parts of the world that seem to be producing this ideology, this anger, this kind of worldview. And in order to understand that, I think, there are people, of course, who have gone back and said, well, it's all about Islam. It's all about the religion. And the problem with that, of course, is the religion has been around for 14 centuries. There have been many, many centuries of peace and some periods of war. When I was in graduate school getting my PhD, I was taught you can't explain something that's varying with something that's constant. In other words, if it's Islam, you should have had 14 centuries of uninterrupted war since it's been around for 14 centuries. But what explains the fact that sometimes you have it, sometimes you don't? What explains the fact that in the last 30 years you have had this particular upsurge of radicalism, violence, and jihad? You can look in the Quran and you can certainly find some verses that are nasty and violent, and you can find verses in there that are beautiful and uplifting and peaceful, as you can, by the way, in the Bible. Religion is a big grab bag. You can usually find in it what you want. And then, of course, there is this further puzzle, which is, for the most part, these fires are emanating out of a particular part of the world. Most people don't realize that the largest Muslim country in the world is Indonesia, which has just elected a businessman, pro-Western, pro-trade, pro-development president who is busily trying to reform that country. The second largest Muslim population in the world by most counts is in India. Again, a country that is democratic, prosperous, or prospering, and in which there are mostly focus on development and growth and the kinds of things that you like to talk about, we like to talk about. It's only when you get to number 4 or 5, by the way, that you get to the fires that we are talking about, which are in the Arab world. Most of this phenomenon that we are discussing is in its origins a Middle Eastern phenomenon. And why is that? Well, permit me to give you a small historical, a sense of the history, and then move on, because you really have to understand the history to understand how this happened. If you look back in the 1950s, when countries in the Middle East were first becoming independent from European colonial empires, And you would have said, what part of the world is going to modernize, is going to be developed, is going to be in some way happily coexisting in the modern world? The Middle East or Asia? Everyone would have said the Middle East. Why? Because the Middle East was already pretty modern. It had had these great centers of culture and civilization like Damascus and Beirut and Baghdad and Alexandria and Egypt. These were places that had been great trading centers, parts of the Ottoman Empire that had been exposed to the currents of modernity. They were also very mixed in population terms. Baghdad in 1920 was a quarter Jewish. And even in the 1950s, you had very large parts of the Middle East, particularly the urban centers, that had centuries of coexistence among Christians and Jews and Muslims and Armenians and Turks and Kurds. And that reality was very much manifest in terms of the outward orientation of many of these countries. If you looked at Asia, by the way, in comparison, you looked at Seoul and Taiwan and Manila, these were backwaters. No one would have regarded them as places that were going to be at the forefront of modernity. And then you begin to see the process of development take place. And initially, it seems to be going at least, it seems to be going well, or at least it seems to be going energetically. So you look at a man like Nasser, the president of Egypt, who was in many ways considered the great hero of the Arab world. He was a modernizer, he was westernized, he wore suits, he read Le Monde. His advisors tended to come from places like the London School of Economics and the University of California at Berkeley. And they were advising in those days a kind of state planning and socialism that we now know doesn't work so well, but that was the best Western advice at the time. And that was, in a way, the impetus of all these places that were coming out of their colonial experiences. But then something happens, and that those republics morph into dictatorships, and they become more and more repressive as the years go by. And the repression only increases, and the grip of these regimes only tightens. And you can look across the Arab world and you see exactly that happen from Libya to Syria. And then you get to the 1970s, and you have this strange phenomenon of deeply repressive regimes, and now an influx of oil money that affects mostly a handful of regimes, but the money starts flowing everywhere through expatriate workers and such. And so the regimes now are deeply repressive and have enormous resources to maintain that repression and to ensure that they don't include the broader population in it. You know, what happens is a very interesting phenomenon in development, which is historically, if you look back over the Western experience, as countries, as the states became more mature, I'm talking now about the 16th, 17th, 18th century in Europe, they started to want more money. They wanted to build armies, they wanted to build infrastructure, but these countries didn't have many natural resources. So the only way the state could get money was to enrich the population in some way and then tax it. But as you start taxing the population starts saying, well, what are we getting in return? We want something back. We want good government, accountable government, maybe even democracy, right? And that process of the state wanting something from you and you wanting something from the state is the reciprocal bargain that produces a mature liberal democratic system. It's the slogan of the American Revolution, right? No taxation without representation. In Saudi Arabia, they use the same slogan, but just turn it on its head. What the Saudi royal family says to its people is, don't worry, no taxation, no representation. In other words, we won't tax you, but we sure as hell won't represent you either. And that break, that very different development model, is what persisted in the Middle East. So imagine yourself now in 1991, 92. You're a young Middle Eastern male, and there are 65% of the Middle East that is under the age of 30. And you are looking around the world and you are seeing communism has cracked and crumbled. Eastern Europe is free. You're seeing that in Africa that decade, the 1990s, 45 free elections were held, most of which were actually genuinely free and fair. You're seeing that in Latin America, an area that was dominated by juntas and high protectionist walls and tariff barriers, the juntas are going away, elections are coming into place, democracy is flourishing, and they're opening themselves up to trade. But the one place in the world where nothing is changing is the Middle East. In 1995, if you had looked at Middle Eastern countries, you would have found that on most key metrics of economic and social well-being, the Middle East was in some ways stagnant or had even gone backward. Egypt in 1950 was more free than it was in 1995. Iraq in 1950 was more free than it was in 1995. Syria in 1950 was more free than it was in 1995. So you have this remarkable phenomenon that where the rest of the world had been making progress, in the Middle East you had had stagnation. But the one thing that you couldn't, in this part of the world, shut down, repress, was the mosque. You could say in Egypt that you will not be allowed to write an op-ed start a political party, attend a Rotary Club meeting, but you couldn't stop people from going to the mosque. So all the discontent, the opposition, the sense of alienation channeled itself into the one place that was available in these societies, which was the mosque. And so that the language of opposition in these countries became a language of religion. So when they would look around at themselves and ask themselves, how did we get here? What is the problem? There was one group of people who were very clear from the start, and their answer, and this was in fact the slogan of Islamic fundamentalism in the 1970s, Islam is the answer. Meaning, you see your problems, we have a solution, and it's an easy solution, and it's an all-encompassing solution, but you have to submit to it. And that became the rallying cry, and that became the organizing ethos of all these discontents that you've seen, that you see today. And as the regimes repressed it more, it became more and more virulent in return. People look at Syria today and wonder why the opposition, why the fighting has become so fierce, why the opposition is so violent. Well, let me remind you of a story about Syria in 1980. There was a town called Hama, in which Assad's father faced an uprising. Uprising of people mostly organized by Islamist politicians, Muslim Brotherhood. And he decided he would put it down pretty harshly, by which I mean to say he killed somewhere between 10 and 30,000 people, nobody knows. And after doing that, and in addition to doing that, he had bulldozers literally bulldoze the town so that it did not exist anymore. And if there were, by the way, men, women, and children in the way, they were bulldozed as well. It was his attempt to demonstrate his power and to say, don't mess with me. So when you look at the fury and the repressed vengeance and violence that is coming out of it, remember, it all is part of this action-reaction dynamic that has been taking place there for the last 20, 30 years. Now, what has happened in those regimes also is that because of that fragility I was talking about, as these tensions have built up and as these regimes have been pressed, what people have discovered is you get rid of the person at the top and you scratch beneath the surface and it turns out there's no state underneath it. There were no institutions underneath it. And you scratch under those institutions and you discover there was no civil society underneath that either. And you scratch under that and you discover, in many cases, there was no nation. Think about Libya. Think about Yemen. Think about Syria. Think about Iraq. In all those places, you got rid of the ruler. It turned out there was no administrative state. You look down and you find no civic associations. And underneath it all, it turns out people don't think of themselves as Syrian or Iraqi or Libyan. They have retreated in that political chaos and vacuum to the identities that are most meaningful to them, which are not the identities of nationhood, which were created by the British and French in 1919. They have gone back to the identities as Shia, Sunnis, Kurds, Armenians, which are, of course, 1,000-year-old identities. And that, in a way, is what explains the chaos, the violence of the Middle East, and the hold that this ideology has taken, because, of course, it has morphed and grown and then been perverted and further perverted in a way that often happens with these kind of in these kind of politically charged atmospheres. And when you look at what's happening here in Europe, in far-flung parts of the world, but the fires all come out of the Middle East. The intellectual, ideological center of this is all there. This is not an Indonesian movement. This has all been that I'm describing now. I grew up in India. In the 1960s in India, no Indian even knew what the Palestinian cause was, what it meant to talk about Sharia. But 3 decades of imams and money coming in from Saudi Arabia and places like that have even radicalized a small segment of the population there. You can hear the same story in Indonesia, and of course you know that the same story is true in Germany and France. And so when you look at that, I don't mean to in any way excuse the violence. In fact, this is even a way of more harshly condemning it, to recognize how systemic it is and how it comes out of a broken structure and a broken civilization. But I think what's important to recognize is that it is something that can change, because it is caused not by, the pure reading of a religion or, some kind of pure manifest evil. It has come out of political, social, economic breakdowns. And therefore, let me tell you another story, which is the parallel story of the world that I just talked about. So I grew up in India in the 1960s and 70s. India was incredibly poor, but more importantly, incredibly cut off from the world. There was really the global system. And then you begin to see more and more engagement with the world. Some of it tentative, some of it born out of desperation, some of it born out of increasing number of people who were being educated, both in the West and in urban environments in India. And that process that I'm describing is mirrored in Kenya and in Ghana and in Nigeria. And then you have the most important event here, which is the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was almost as though the barriers for countries that wanted to participate suddenly come down, and everybody is now playing the same game, which is how do you develop? How do you lift up your people? And that process really shoots off in the 1990s in a dramatic way everywhere other than the Middle East. So that if you looked at the world in 1979, the number of countries that were growing at 3% a year in 1979 was 31, 32. The number of countries growing at 3% a year or more in 2007, before the financial crisis, was 124. So you had suddenly quadrupled the number of countries that could successfully participate in the global system and were in some way or the other trying to raise standards of living, raise the well-being of their people. And even now, after this long global recession, 85 countries in the world are growing at 3% a year or more. People look at the fact that some of these countries, Brazil, some of the countries in Africa have slowed down. China, most notably, has slowed down. But at the end of the day, these are cyclical adjustments in a secular trend. If you look 20 years ago, emerging markets, so-called emerging markets, were 5% of the global economy. Today, they are 44% of the global economy. And that is, in some ways, the big story of our time. That when people look back, that is what they will notice. And why has this happened? It's happened because of the end of communism, because of the end of that ideological battle, because of the rise of communications, because of the growth of the information revolution and technology. I tell you one funny story about that, because information technology is in so many ways about giving people knowledge and giving them access to information. So in 1990, Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait. And the country right next to Kuwait is Iraq. And if he's going for the oil, the country right next to Kuwait is Saudi Arabia. And the Saudis think to themselves, my God, if the guy wants oil, all Saddam Hussein has to do is keep driving his tanks, and literally in 25 minutes, they'll get to Saudi Arabia. So the Saudis have to decide, what are we going to do? Do we let the Americans come in and protect us, or do we not and risk an invasion from Saddam Hussein? Tough decision. It's a very conservative country, very conservative monarchy, and the king is 85 years old. The king in Saudi Arabia is always 85 years old. They have this snail space succession where, if you die, until now it used to be that your next oldest brother becomes king, and there were 66 of them waiting in line. So by the time it was your turn, you were always 85. The current king is, I forget, like 87, I think, or it's 84. The crown prince was 83, and then in a very bold move, the king decided to really usher in the young guard, so the new crown prince is 65. So he says, give me a week to think about this. And for that week, let's not tell anyone that Iraq invaded Kuwait. So it was a state secret in Saudi Arabia for 1 week that their next door neighbor had been invaded by Iraq, and it held. Now, this is just 1990. Imagine today, even in Saudi Arabia, how long a secret like that would hold, right? 2 minutes? Because you now live in a world of satellite television. You live in a world of computers and the web and internet websites. You live in a world of handheld devices that are really very powerful computers. I mean, even something like Twitter. If you remember, Twitter's original formulation was you had 140 characters to respond to the question, what are you doing right now? And so all you needed was some guy in Kuwait to tweet, I'm being invaded by Iraq. And that would have been the end of the Saudi state secret. Right? But think about how powerful this is, because the whole point of governmental power, the whole focus of governmental power in large part was the control of information. So if you looked at coups in the 1930s, they would always go for two things, the presidential palace and then the radio station. And in the 1950s, they'd go for the presidential palace and the TV station, because you wanted to control the seat of power and the seat of information, because information was broadcast as a one-to-many system. Well, today, when every laptop, every iPad, every phone is in effect a broadcasting mechanism where you have a many-to-many network. Well, you can take the presidential palace, but after that, what would you do? You take a radio station, any one of you could broadcast as powerfully as that radio station on one of your phones, right? And that is what we've seen in the Green Revolution and so many of these events around the world. And so that transformation is part of what we're talking about here. But I would say probably the biggest and most important piece of this has been the diffusion of knowledge. So if I think about, the world I grew up in the world today, what is striking to me is that if you go around the world today, and we have the distinguished head of UNCTAD here, and he can probably describe this much better than I could. You meet with a deputy finance minister in an African country. You'll discover he has a master's in economics from Georgetown. You meet with the deputy central bank governor of Ecuador, and you'll discover he's a PhD from the University of Chicago. And that phenomenon that I'm describing is true in many different levels, in many different countries around the world. And then you meet with the people in the private sector, and it'll turn out that one has an MBA from here, another is an electrical engineer. Why is this important? Because what they are doing is they are accessing a common base of knowledge that is growing around the world about how to run societies, how to develop them. It's not all perfect, but the beauty of it is that it is always being enriched and expanded by best practices everywhere. And that common reality that because we are connected and because we are all trying to do the same thing, and we're all sharing in the same standards, there is progress. Now, sometimes we don't like to think about progress because, you think the world is, oh my God, it's so terrible and violent. But the data on this is very clear. We're living, despite these horrible outbursts of terrorism, we're living in more peaceful times than we've lived for many, many decades because there is no great power war taking place. We are living also in times when you are seeing a dramatic reduction of poverty around the world. The Millennium Goals that the UN laid out were reached 4 years in advance of what they were meant to be. And these were goals that said extreme poverty, $1.25 a day. We're going to halve the number of people living on them. And the great challenge now is, can you actually eradicate poverty? As Bill Gates, in one of his letters recently said, he believes that within his lifetime, extreme poverty will essentially be eradicated around the world. And then you have those goals that Scott talked about, which are all associated and affiliated to it. And they are very, very important because the story that I was trying to tell, in a way, is a story of enormous progress on the whole. But it also reminds you that when there are parts of the world or pockets of the world or areas of the world which do not share in that same development or share in it in an unequal or lopsided way, it's not going to all work out. You can have some very nasty responses, backlashes, pathologies that develop in it. And yet I do believe that the solution, the answer going forward, is going to be the kinds of things that Scott outlined. Look, if you think about the world that I was describing, that many of you grew up in, and particularly those of you from outside the United States know, in the 1960s and 70s, there were violent guerrilla movements in many, many countries around the world. People forget this now, but there was a huge outbreak of terrorism. We call them more guerrilla movements, revolutionary war, call it what you will, inspired by people like Che Guevara, all over the world. It was happening in Latin America, Shining Path in Peru. It was happening in Europe, the Red Brigades, the Baader-Meinhof gang. It was happening in Asia. India, where I grew up, there was a huge movement called the Naxalites, and they were Maoist guerrillas intent on toppling the government. For the most part, these movements have all died out. Why? Well, part of it was surely that Maoism and radical Marxism, and it sort of died of its own weight, partly because this ideology had nothing to offer in the long run, partly because the centers of these ideologies, the Soviet Union and Maoist China themselves, in many ways gave it up or collapsed. But a lot of it was also that these countries developed. They grew larger and larger middle classes. They provided greater and greater opportunities. They moved up on the UN's Human Development Index. And in those circumstances, people found there was less raw material to work with. Ideology is always a phenomenon of the educated, or at least half-educated groups, but they prey on people who are dispossessed. They prey on people who are weak, people who are in some way feel that they have nothing, there's no life ahead of them, particularly in comparison to what they see around them. And so if you look at that phenomenon and you ask yourself, look at Latin America, which was filled with these movements, and today the last one is really the FARC in Colombia, and that war is now literally, as we speak, being wound down through peace talks. If you think about the jungles of Southeast Asia, only 25 years ago were filled with radical, violent guerrilla movements, and they've all gone away. You go to Southeast Asia now, and it's shopping malls and technology that dominate the reality and the conversation there. How did this happen? It is because this general growth that I'm talking about was able to make it happen. But you have to do it in a way that empowers people, that gives them some sense of voice, that gives them some sense that they own their future. It is not simply about handing out money. It is about creating dignity and opportunity and a new life for them. And wherever you see that being done in a sustainable way, just struck by the fact that, somehow or the other, these places seem to get more stable over time. It's not easy, and I don't pretend that there's a silver bullet here. But there may be 17 or 20 or 30 silver bullets, and if you can manage to work on all of them, it will make a huge difference. So let me just close by saying, I wanted to try to give you a sense of the depth of the problem in some parts of the world, but I really want to focus much more on the fact that the rest of the world, by which I mean the vast majority of the world, heroically do something that has not been done in centuries. We have eliminated a greater share of poverty in the world in the last 10 years than in the previous 100. It is quite likely that in the next 10 or 15 years, we will be able to do more than has been done even in this last 10. But the most important thing to remember is this doesn't happen by magic. It doesn't happen by some divine ordination. This doesn't happen because, I'm describing this process to you and it's just going to fulfill itself. It happens because people make it happen. It happens because the private sector generate jobs. It happens because the public sector is able to create potable water and hygiene and infrastructure that allows this development to take place. It happens because governments focus on the collective action issues like global warming and climate change that will otherwise make it more difficult to sustain this. So don't leave thinking that this is all going to work out because the unwritten the wand of history will make it happen. There is no wand of history. You are the wand of history, and you will make it happen if you work at it. But if you do, I think there's extraordinary good news around the horizon, and I look forward to working with you on it. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please proceed to the track rooms down the escalator on level 1, fellows, to join Fareed and Scott on stage for a photo. See you later.